Hello there. It's 7 o'clock, and as people coming in, I've put into the chat space a couple of questions just to get a bit of a feel about who you are and where you're coming from. What I'm looking for is, are you already experienced in grants? And if you are, what's your experience and what are the barriers and the issues that you need that we can explore tonight? Or the second one is, if you're not experienced in grants, what is the barrier that's stopping you? What are the questions that you need to ask? So I've just put them in the chat space before we start this event. So all I'm asking is, while we're waiting, if you could give us some information, so that helps me to be able to make sure that you get to hear what you're looking for. And as you're doing that, it's 7:01, and out of respect for people who attend on time, I'm now going to start the presentation. And the presentation, or the information session we're going to do today, is the 10 things you should know about grants. And I'll explain shortly why I think that's important. Okay, so who am I? Who's this person that's coming out and talking to you? Well, my name is Pat Grosse, and I've over 30 years experience in the field. I started off in the UK looking at getting grants out of the European Union, which means what I used to do was I used to look at all the policy directions, how they were being developed, what the final outcome was, what the plan was, and then to look at what the funding opportunities were. And then we'd be organising conferences and workshops. I did that for 10 years, and I found myself at one point putting together a training fund. At the time, 20 years ago, was equivalent to about 25 million Australian dollars. So figure out what that would be equivalent to today. And I had to set that up from scratch. So basically, the whole grants, jobs and resources were done in a 6-week window. That was an interesting experience. And afterwards, I left the country and came to Australia. And then I found myself working in a government role, in a government entity. And guess what? We were looking after the grant space. So I'm coming at you with experience of the far side, the dark side of the fence, but also in 2010, I left my job and started up the business, the community entrepreneur, working initially with the not-for-profits in the community development space. And then I found that businesses were also asking, so we actually went into the grant space. My values are to even the playing field. There's some brilliant ideas out there, but the problem is that people don't know how to write the grants applications that are successful enough to get the funding, to get the ideas off the ground. So that's where we came in, and me especially, helping by putting the grant applications together. And just recently, we set up the grant writing help desk. Because there's quite a few, especially those starting out, not sure where they're going, can't afford the services of a professional grant writer. So what we did was put together this grant writing help desk, getthatgrant.com, and you go on there, and there's about 5 different entry points, and I'll talk about that later. And you can go on there, and there's plenty of free resources. So if you're thinking about grants, not sure where to start, or you're looking to build your grants portfolio, or you want training, everything's there, depending on the entry point that you want to come in on. Okay, so here we go. 30 years experience, both sides of the funding fence, being involved in all aspects of the funding. Okay, so why we're here today, this is why I wanted to do this. It's not been easy over the last couple of years. 2019 was, okay year. Then we had things like the bushfires. We had the pandemic. Now we're currently dealing with the floods. And what happens in those adverse circumstances is that funding is made available, especially during the pandemic. What we found was whatever grants were available, the number of applications rose considerably. So in one instance, where there was 1 in 4 grants applications being funded, for this funder, it went to 1 in 12. So that's more than 90% of grant applications were unsuccessful. We were approached a few times by unsuccessful grant applicants who had only got a blanket letter from the funder basically saying, next time, make sure you do this, 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 and this. It wasn't customized. They didn't know what they'd done wrong, and they came and they asked us. And it was a really good exercise because I noticed that there were some common similarities. They were making the same mistakes. And had they known about these mistakes, maybe the result would have been different. So what I've done is put together these 10 points, this checklist of the 10 things that you that you should know about grants before you sit down and start writing. What that also means here is we've got a checklist which you can download at the end or at any time, which is a summary of these 10 points. And I can guarantee you that at least one of them may change the way you look at grants forever. And we'll get to that one. It's not the first one, it's a couple in, but when we get there, I'll point it out to you. Okay. We have got, just want to flag with you that if you do want to take grant writing seriously and you're looking for a follow-up after this session, we do have a self-paced program called Grant Writing for Beginners. It's $497. And if you have any questions about it, just ask me at the end of the session. Right, okay, so let's get started. Well, actually, before we get started, I want to have a look at the sort of questions you're asking. A small business, too small for many grants. I fully understand that. Partnering with not-for-profits and then being dependent on them approving acquittals and getting them in on time and too slow to get a follow-up. Yes. If you're a business, before we start, this is like a bonus. If you're a business and you don't qualify for a grant, you may be able to work or have services for an organization that can apply for the grant, and they can then contract you as the contractor. So if you're not eligible, it doesn't mean that that's an automatic walk away. It could mean that there's somebody out there who is eligible and that you could be a contractor, a professional who's been engaged for their services. Okay, supporting vulnerable people with basic needs, yes. Okay, school fields next I wanted to show you guys, yes. We lack knowledge on how to request for grants and partnerships with organisations which can help support us through that process. Okay, first of all, if you're not incorporated or you're not a legal entity, then you can be, what's the word, auspiced. You can approach another organisation. Same scenario when I was talking about a business. They can, well, two things. One, they can actually apply for the grant and use your services and pay you for your services. Or if you're not a legal entity, because it's a contract between the funder and a legal entity. So if you don't have a status, then there are arrangements in place for these kind of legal entities organisations to actually sponsor you so that you can apply, or they can apply and hand the money over to you. But they are responsible for making sure that you do what you said you were going to do. But if you want to contact me afterwards, we can have a conversation around that. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing to be aware of, that grants are neither donations nor free money. And what I mean there is that when you're applying for a grant, you're applying for change. It's got to be a project focus. If you want money just to go into your general revenue to boost what you're doing, with no real ties, it's just a generous donation, then do not apply for a grant. You go out there as if you're not for profit and you go for donations. A grant is a project. It's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you've got to effect change or get a result at the end of it. Working in a government role, 1 year we did, the government did relax its rules for a couple of years. And some organisations were just getting funding to just do what they wanted to do. They were actually peak bodies, if I remember. The problem was that we had no evidence on what they spent the money on. So that very, very quickly ended. And in the future, they were allocated the funding, but in the agreement, it had to be a project. Another problem I come across is, for instance, this is an idea that I have clients who are looking for funding for camps, and it's very difficult to get funding for camps. And in fact, some guidelines actually state we do not pay for camps. And the reason that is because what's the change? Yes, you can if it's been a focus, but if you're just going to pay for young people to go away for a few days, then it can be seen as a recreation activity for the sake of being a recreation activity. It's not, there are some limited funds that will fund grants, but more often than not, there isn't a substantial measurement of change that can happen in a period of a few days. So in essence, that's another example of why you must have something that will be determined and measured as a change. And I'm saying most of the time, because there's always going to be the exceptions. During the height of the pandemic and the lockdowns, there was plenty of donations of food, and they were given as grants. So I'm saying that most of the time, just put in your head that you've got an idea, and then you can see a result, and that's what they're looking for. Okay. Secondly, and I used to get this a lot working in the government job, is that people wanted the funding, but they didn't want to account for the funding. They didn't want to do the reporting. It was too much. And they were saying, and to some degree it's true, that there was more time spent on reporting, progress, the evaluation, on administration, than the actual grant itself. And that can happen. But even then, there's other reasons for getting the grant. It's not to do with how much time and how much money it's going to cost. But at the end of the day, there is red tape. Grants come with conditions that must be met. So before you sit down and you write your grant application, you can go online if you find the grant. If you're looking for grants in Australia, if you go on to the getthatgrant.com, the grant writing help desk and go onto the section that says where to find grants, we've actually got a free guide that you can download that's got the web links, and you can start looking. And basically you can practice, because the funders put the information for their grants online and leave them online, even when the grant's closed. So you can go in and you can practice, and you can go on. And so whether it's a past grant or the current one that's open at the moment, more often than not, they will probably, if it's a government grant in particular, they will have an example copy of the funding contract, the funding agreement. And it's important. And you might just think, you know, let's focus on the guidelines. Let's focus on the application. But it's important that you actually do read that contract, because there might be something in it that you cannot comply with. But it's part of the red tape. I've had small organisations that couldn't afford public liability insurance. That is a given. That's a requirement. So that's part of the red tape. Insurances, different kinds of insurances that may be needed. Could be something to do with intellectual property rights. That's part of this. And there's quite a few things that you need to be looking at in the funding agreement, including the delivery milestone reports. And there are dates on those, so make sure that you've got those. You don't ignore them, because if you don't fill them in, guess what? You don't get the next tranche of funding, because it's not that often, unless it's a very small grant, that a funder will give you 100% of the funding up front. There are requirements. You know, you might get 50% up front, and then 30% when you filled in this report, and then 20% when you filled in this report. The problem you need to be aware of is that you need to have the administration resources in your organisation or available, so that you can handle the administrivia, because you can't just have the money and walk away and expect not to be accountable. Now, this is the number one. This is what first thing I found when I was reading through the grant applications that people had given me as examples, wanting to know what they had not done right. And basically, this is the tendency. You will sit down, you will start writing your answer to the question. The question that you think you see, so there's two things going on here. One is you're not really answering the question they are asking. You immediately sit down and go, oh, right, and you just tell them what you want to do. Now, the secret is this. Imagine that you sort of got your binoculars and you're looking in the distance and you see a problem or an opportunity, something that needs changing. You've got the resources, you know, the skill, the expertise, but what you don't have is the money. If you were a business and you were seeing that as a potential customer, there would be an exchange of money for your service. But that's not the case. This could be for business development. It could be for community. It doesn't matter. There's something out there that you can deal with. But they don't have the money. Over here, however, there's somebody else who's looking at that same opportunity or that same issue. And they have this great big plan of what they want to have happen. They want to see priorities. They want to see outcomes. But they do not have the resources on the ground. They've got the money, but they don't have the on-ground resources. So what you're doing is you are competing with others to come along to them and say, hey, we can help you achieve the outcome you want by doing this. So how do you do that when you sit down and you look at a grant application? Well, you just get highlighter pens. You get a copy of the guidelines, or you just highlight the guidelines online if you've got them online, and you do this. You start looking. You start looking to see if there is any mention of a policy or a plan or an overarching document. And if there is, read it. Because grant funding is the way that they implement the policy or the plan. That's what they're doing. They want to make sure that they can do what they said they were going to do. This is the funder. They want to achieve these outcomes. And what they're doing is giving the money out there for people to come along and bid for, saying, yes, we can contribute here. If you give us this money, this is what we're going to do. And that seems to match the big jigsaw puzzle that they're putting together. So, sorry, I've just lost the trail there. So it's important to look at, there is no mention of an overarching plan, then look for these words. Anything that's got a name, objective, and or an outcome. Especially an outcome. If the grant is small, the funder may just mention outcomes, nothing about aims, nothing about big plans. They just might say, these are the outcomes we're looking for. Now, an outcome is the result of what you're doing. It's the result of the result. So if the result is that 9 people get trained, the outcome may be that they find jobs. So you're increasing the number of people who are finding jobs. So that's what they're looking for. They're looking to jobs. They're thinking of training. So you come in and you go, yes, we can do this training, and this training we can help you get blah blah number of jobs. See what I mean? There's a connection. You just don't go out there and say, we want to run this training course and we want to do this, this, and this. Well, yeah, but what's it got to do with what they're wanting? So you've got to tie it very closely to what they're wanting. And it's amazing, and really amazing, how many first-timers or novices in the grant field just don't do that. So next time, whatever, first thing you do is highlight those keywords. Makes the big difference. And you just keep remembering them and referring back to them. Okay, so this is another essential thing that you should know when you're putting back together a grant application. The funder doesn't know who you are, even if they do. And what I mean here is you've got to create your pitch, even if they know you and you've been funded in the past, or they know the problem, or they know your community. Doesn't matter. You have got to start with a blank piece of paper in terms of the evidence. And you've got to give them that evidence. So one of the questions is always going to be around, what is the need for this project? What's going on out there that you need to step in and do what you need to do? And you can just basically say, I don't know, young people are not going to school or something like that. But that's not good enough because, young people are not going to school, whatever. You've really got to go into that, get the data, show the numbers, see the research to say why they're not going to school. Tell the story. The more that you tell, as if you're trying to teach a child, and they keep going, why, get right down to that why, and get to the point where you're giving them all the facts, so there's no way that they can argue. And that's what you need to do. Also, there's another question in the application process, which is ask them more about who you are and what capacity you have to deliver or to work with their funding. So you've got to talk about your expertise. You've got to talk about the way that your structure and how you're going to manage the project. But you've got to do it in such a way that you have got to show them your history, your expertise in the word limit. Of course, sometimes it's difficult, but even if they know you as being the best deliverer on the planet, it doesn't matter. You've got to be starting as if nobody knows you. Why is all of this? Quite simply, and I'll give you the example in the government space. 5 years later, after the project's ended and everybody's moved on or whatever, somebody will come in and audit the process. Because it's public money, it belongs to, it's taxpayers' money or whatever, they'll come in and have a look to make sure that the money is being spent properly. And when it looks at the grants process, of course, they're going to look at, did the funder achieve the outcomes? Then they'll look at the grants process, and they'll have a look at the kind of examples of grants they funded. And they'll be asking those questions. And if they look at Open One Up and it's sort of vague, we go, why did you fund this? And of course, it's not fair either, because somebody might have had a really good application and really put a lot of time and effort into it, and it got passed over because somebody knew that this was a problem here. You can't do that, because the people who are coming into audit know nothing about the circumstances 5 years ago. And I'll give you a good example here. We were working on a project around gentrification in an area that had previously had, had blue collar workers, normal everyday workers. And they were undergoing a process of change. You see this happen in Sydney, you see this happen in Melbourne, where neighbourhoods get taken over by new developments, and the old working class people get pushed out, the social housing becomes an issue, etc. Now, we actually we got funded on a gentrification project, and we were very good, putting this is the situation. Had the auditor 5 years later looked back on that and said, well, there's no issue, because 5 years later that whole suburb was gentrified, so they wouldn't have been able to understand why on earth you were funding gentrification in that suburb. But what you do is you give all the information to demonstrate that at that period in time there was a need. So it's important that when you are putting together an application, and again, these were the first timers who were not very specific about location of where they wanted to deliver, what the circumstances were, and they just wanted, and I've seen this a few times, where you have a new program and you want to deliver it in schools, but for the sake of funding, you really need to target the schools in certain areas with certain social issues. And you need to be able to demonstrate that in the application form. So alongside the fact that you need to be working to what the funder wants, you also need to argue on a blank piece of paper and give as much detail in terms of numbers tell a story, examples as you possibly can. We, a few years ago, put in an application in a very contestable round. It was really, really sort of, it turned over the landscape, to be honest. Organisations that had been funded ongoing for years suddenly found they had no money because the money had been allocated elsewhere. In the meantime, I was applying with, working with two small community organisations on a community development application. We weren't sure how it would do. And so there were two questions in particular. Which two were they? The one about demonstrating the need and the one about your ability to deliver. We weren't sure it was strong, so we brainstormed and we threw everything into that response. And they were funded, and they were actually funded more than they'd applied for. And they got a letter from the funder actually congratulating them on the way they'd answered those two questions. And that's exactly what we did. We brainstormed and then condensed it all down factually with the data and the figures. That's what they want to see. Okay. You must be able to do what you say you will. So that's why funders want to know about you. I think there's all the administrative questions about you as an organization, about who's in charge. They want to make sure that the funding application has been endorsed at the top level, because the last thing they want is to guarantee, to put a funding agreement out there because a middle level person in an organization has applied and the top level are going, we don't know what this is. It is a formal contract. It's a legally binding contract, and it needs to be signed at the top of the organization. So in the application process, they want to know who is at the top of the tree, because if you've got the endorsement from the top of your tree, and sometimes they will ask for a letter from the highest level to say, yes, we agree to this application. So there are things that you must be able to do what you say you will do. Again, that's about your capacity and your ability, that you've got the right expertise. If you haven't got the expertise, you can source the expertise, but that you know what the expertise is. And the other thing about this is throughout the application form, there are triggers about how you may or may not be a risk to them. And we may cover this again, but what they want to do is nobody wants to issue funding to an organization, a business, or whoever, and then find that they can't deliver. Because they can't get, well, if they give the money back, sometimes there's every possibility the money doesn't go back into the original pot. So they have to make sure before they go into a funding agreement. So there'll be things that they will do. For instance, they may request that you submit up to 3 years of your financial statements. And again, that 3 years, it's that magic 3 years for an organization to be viable. Yes, you may make some losses. That's not the issue. It's just to show that you've got a cash flow and that you're a viable organization. And when they go through the assessment process, that'll be one of the things that they will be looking at. If you're new and you don't have that and there's a request, always contact them, because they may say, well, okay, in some cases they'll say, nope, we need 3 years and we might need them audited. If you're a small organization that doesn't need to have your accounts audited, that's a problem and you're ineligible. And that's just happened to us. So not us, but one of our clients. So you need to, if you aren't, I've only been in business a few months, ask the funder, and they may turn around and say, just send us your documents in the period that you've been operating. But what they're doing is they're still wanting to see that there's some cash flow. There are questions, they may ask the questions about, have you thought about the risks of this project? It's not all the time, it's not one of those questions that's front of face, but they'll be looking at that. The other risk that we're looking at is your project plan and how well you've structured what you're going to do. Because you can tell, if you've been over ambitious about what you want to do with the amount of funding you're asking for, then that's a problem. That's a problem to them. That's a risk. So throughout the application form, and what you respond, there are triggers, and they're always looking at how comfortable and how safe the funding will be in your possession. And that's showing them that you've got the systems in place, that you can monitor your progress, that you've got that ability, you've got the right people in with the right skills. So you must be able to do what you say you will. This is one that's very, very pertinent right now. And that's one about we're saying the funder controls the clock. If you are applying for something you need to have happening in the next 2 or 3 months, generally I would say forget looking for a grant. I do get approached by people saying we want it and we want it very quickly. And I'm going, first of all, the grant application time frame that you're given is usually a 4 to 6 week window, average max. Some of them are longer, but this is the average. And I did a presentation last week where I actually created a flowchart, and the process that you are exposed to, i.e. that time 4 to 6 week time frame, actually the bigger picture is that big. There's lots of activity before it gets to being announced as a grant process, and afterwards when they do all the assessment. So it does take time, and you may be waiting 3-4 months to get an answer if you're successful. There is one grant that closed last December, and as far as we're aware last week, the applicants had still not been notified whether they were successful or not. That is a long time. Infrastructure grants, there are some grants out there for infrastructure. They can take, 4, 5, 6 months sometimes to be approved. So again, if you're thinking of building, look at your time frame, be prepared to be flexible. If you really want the money, you may have to be flexible. If you need the money now, then I would be saying, look elsewhere. Okay, mentioned this already. The number 7 is a good submission proves you are low risk. And I've just seen the comment there about it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, but it's true. And it's not about the time frames. And can I say to you that it's not that unusual? Back in the UK, there was a major European round called the European Social Funds, and at one point they were a whole year out of sync. So it's not something that's a trait of Australia. It does happen. It's just where systems work. Having said that, the quickest turnaround was last year. We put a submission in around about Thursday, Friday, and the client got notified the following Tuesday. And it was a 6-figure amount as well. So that one, I mean, we thought it was a joke at the time, thought, oh, this is not right, but it was right. Because of the way that particular fund was structured, there was some authority of decision making at the coalface, so to speak, but that is extremely rare. But the good submission, let's go back to this, a good submission proves you are a low risk. And again, I said how, so things that we'll be looking for, the financials, evidence that are, evidence that, of buying at the top. In fact, the very last page, which is the sign off, must be signed off by a board member or the CEO, because you are officially applying, and as a result of that, you may end up with a formal contract. So as I said, a good submission. When I said if you answer the questions, for instance, a good project plan, a good risk plan, a good evaluation plan, if they can see that you know what you're doing, then that proves that I'd say proves, that's in inverted commas, but you will come over to them as being a low risk. Okay, I say number 8 is that writing an application is like marketing on steroids. That's why I say to people 2 things. I say that a grant application is in fact a business case. Now, if you want to practice, can I just alert you to the fact that If you go to our websites, there's two of them. One is the communityentrepreneur.com. The other one is getthatgrant.com. You will be able to find information about the project planning app, and you can download that on the app stores, you know, the Android or the Apple, and also straight from our website. There's a form you can fill in. And basically the whole idea behind that is you could be out and about and you could have an idea. How many times have you had an idea? How many times have you had an idea and then you've just forgotten about it? It's just gone. And you say, you know, the richest man in the graveyard. How many sort of ideas that, you know, when people get to the end of their lives, they just wish that they'd actually, you know, followed their dreams, followed those project ideas. And this is what it is. You could be out and about, you've got an idea, you may be talking and brainstorming with people, and it sits down and it goes through the whole flow of what you want to do. You know, what do you want to do? What's the need? What's the opportunity? How are you going to do it? Who's going to be involved? How much money is it going to cost? Etc., etc. And we created that not for anything really, but when you've done it, lo and behold, you've probably got the bones of a grant application as well, because that's what a grant application is. It's putting together a business case. So, you know, in a business case, you'll be putting your pitch, and I'm saying your pitch is how you can help them achieve their results by what you want to do. Your marketing, your selling, your proof of concept, you know, the need that's out there. The proof of concept would even go as far as putting together those letters of support that you can upload with your application, and they're very, very useful, especially if you've got an application form that's limited in number of words that you can answer with, and you want to get the message across. The way to do it is to get somebody out there, your testimonial or your referral, whoever, to be able to talk about the situation from their perspective. So if you know that there's a need to do this and there's this issue, identify somebody who's in the middle of that issue. Give you a good example. Bushfire recovery. There was a town, or there is a town at the time, they had 3 petrol stations, and every one of them closed at 7 p.m. and didn't open till 7 a.m. the next day. They were small enough. They weren't big thinkers. Can you imagine what happened when the fires went through? There was nowhere. It was rural. There was nowhere for them to get the fuel. That we were talking here, the police, the emergency services, the medical services, tourists, businesses, everybody. It was 2 hours to the nearest mainline centre. So basically, you know, they had problems chasing around the countryside with fuel restrictions. So I worked with one of those petrol stations, who said, yeah, we want to apply for a grant. We want to upgrade our storage, and we want to introduce a 24/7 payment system. And I actually had the pleasure of putting together 27 pages of letters of support. And those letters of support, every one of them came from a different angle of their experience. I would never see that again. Of course, the project got funded, but it's proof of concept, proof of need, and that's how it worked. And then the other one is, you know, that you, in your unique selling proposition, your capacity to deliver. So you think about it, your pitch, your proof of concept, your unique selling, that is marketing on steroids. So, you know, approach that. We've got a program called Ninja Grant Writing, and that takes that principle as well. It also takes that principle of being out there, looking over here and seeing what's going on over here. We treat it like a campaign. So And that's something you can have a look at. That's in our Get That Grant grant writing help desk. It's $97 program. Again, it will help you get in the right mindset to be able to tackle those grant applications. Number 9 is, yes, unfortunately, not all applications get funded. That is a fact. There's nothing we can do about it. In fact, what you need to do before you apply for any funding from a particular grant is, if possible, find out how much money is in the total pool. And then you can look at how much they're prepared to pay per application or success then, and do your maths, do your figures, and you can see how many are likely to get funded. And I've seen some what I call almost criminal cases where the funder has tried, especially during COVID, this one in particular, tried to get as many people, organizations to apply for the funding as possible, but the bucket was very small. So there was very, very, low chance of people getting funded. It was an opportunity for the funder to get these brilliant ideas, because that's what they get, your ideas. You remember I'm saying you're helping them to solve their problem. At the same time, you're giving them ideas. How do you find out about the total pool? It should be, there's 2 ways. One, if you subscribe to a funding sort of database, they may tell you, or it may be somewhere in the guidelines. In fact, if it's a government one, they probably will tell you that the whole program's got this, and for this what we're doing here, there's this much available, or it could be so much available per year for 4 years. So there are generally some clues to what's in the total pool, and you can actually ring up and ask them, and they may be prepared to tell you. But it does work. If you know that there's a lot of money in the pool, then you can relax a little bit. But if you know it's very limited, then you're probably going to have, you know it's going to be very competitive. There's also other reasons why you might not get funded. Could be geographic, because there may be intention to spread the grant around. And you may have a dearth, a lack of applications over here, and you might have somewhere where there's a whole group of applications. Well, it's not going to be fair. I mean, especially when you look at population sizes and all of that, you might find that actually you can't fund all of these. But even this might have been a very weak application. It's the only application over here, so that might actually get a look in, and the strong one over here, because there's 2 or 3, might not. And so you might have the best application in the world. I can tell you about one grant that was allocated like that. I was working with, and they looked at this area, and they said, and they looked for the nearest service provider to that area. One of those areas that was identified was a caravan park, because we were just joking about it. It was going, why would anybody want to put funding into an area where it was just a caravan park? It was just the way that the diagrams are sort of converged. So sometimes, some silly things go on in the background with the best of intentions. So, and we always say, look, if you put a really good application together in the first place, you can repurpose it. It's never wasted if you've got a good business case, because that's what it's doing. The whole grant application process is helping you to put together a business case. You could take it to the bank because you've got the right information. Okay, you need to tweak, because you're not trying to sell it to that funder, you're trying to sell it to the bank, but you've gone through the whole practice. So it's not worth being disappointed. The other thing is, you may be able to ring up or they may get feedback and say, well, you actually just needed to make a tweak, a change here. And that's happened 2 or 3 times with us. Weren't funded the first time, made a tweak the second time because it was repeated, and got funded. So it is not the end of the world if it's not successful. You can either repurpose it or go back and find out what went wrong and have another go. they allow you to do that. And number 10, this is a good one. All grants are different, yet they all ask for the same things. Now, people say to me, you know, oh, do you do grants about this? Do you do grants about that? And I'll say yes, because you have got the technical knowledge, the technical people, and we have got the business case. We're the business strategists. So if you're talking about all grants are different and yet they ask the same thing, they're going to, well, they want to know what you do. We haven't put that on there yet, but they want to know what you want to do, of course. But then they want to know, you know, evidence of need, the opportunity, the solution. Even if it's a business grant, they want to know, you know, if you're doing it from, it could be marketing, it could be business growth. Thinking of, you know, the areas, it could be infrastructure. They'll want to know, you know, that need. They want to know the concept here is working. There's a real rationale for it. That it's going to get support. They want to know there's a good plan, and that you can measure the results. That you just don't start a project and end a project. You want to see what we did here, what went well. They want to see that you've got the capability to deliver. They want to see that you've got the financial capacity. So looking at the actual budget is important as well. And what we used to do, and even the front line, is it's not just reading the content of the, you know, of what you're going to do in the questions and the criteria. Match it. We used to match it to what the budget was telling us as well, because you have these grandiose ideas, but you don't have the budget to do it. You want to do it on the smell of an oil rag. To be honest with you, you have to make sure that you applying for enough to do this, and not not just to try and impress the funder, because you're not asking for a lot, and that's a big mistake that the smaller organisations make in particular. I can tell you about one organisation being funded 3 previous years, $137,000. Next time they were looking at it, they ran on volunteers, didn't work because the volunteers weren't that committed. Next time around, they were in the big bucket with the big boys, and we applied and looking for staff, etc., because we knew they'd be able to deliver the project. 730,000, 4 times as much. Risk mitigation, there's going to be looking, you know, they're going to be looking at reducing the risks and evidence of success. So they're going to be asking those kind of questions, because it's all part of the business case. It's a solid business case. Okay, so basically, you should be able to download. This is a summary. Pardon us, but the version we've got here actually had a few glitches in it. But the version that you should get is a summary of those 10 bonus of those checklists. And just to refer to you, we talked about the grant writing help desk. This is you know, this is what we're doing. We just want to make sure that you've got access to as much free information as possible. There's also, you know, the next stage, there is paid stuff in there as well. But what we're looking at there are 5 entry points. One point is what grants are about. The second is where to start looking, and that's where you can download that free guide that gives you links to websites to start looking for grants. A DIY grant writing if you want to do it yourself. In there, there's a DIY grant writing toolkit, and I know it can be very lonely if you're writing an application and you're not quite sure. So we've got some checklists in this toolkit. We've also got a Teach Yourself grant writing manual. It's based on the Australian system, but it shows you how to gather all the information that you need to be able to write a really good application. The 4th entry point is about engaging a grant writer. So if you need, you know, access to us, then how to do that. And then in the 5th area is our learning and development section, where we've got online programs, including that grant writing for beginners. And also we can go out and we can do workshops and training. So we're saying to you, just have a look at that, getthatgrant.com. We'd love some feedback for the grant writing help desk, because we're always wanting to improve. And they say this is the first outing here. So my question to you is, do you have any questions? And does anybody want to know about the grant writing for beginners program? Now I know there's a 10-second delay as well. How did you find this? Okay, so looking at the Karen's suggested, how do you find out about the total pool? I think I've answered that one. Getthatgrant.com. I heard of someone who got funded for infrastructure for an entire indoor horse arena, a small business. It's in Canada. I actually got funding for a camp draft as well. So that was here in Australia. Yes, so Dennis, I'm quite happy to continue our conversation afterwards. And is there a Q&A here? I'm just looking in the chat space. Oh, Q&A, okay. Right, let's have a look. Is it good or bad to mention previously funding and got these results as well as my other credentials? Yes, it's good. She said the question here is it good or bad to mention I've been previously funded and got these results? Yes, it's a benchmark. Second is, can you give places to find data for areas, census data? Yes, okay. In Australia, the shortcut, there's two shortcuts. One is to go online and key in ID space and then the name of the geographic area. So I'm working on something for the Gold Coast. So I did ID space Gold Coast. And they have summarized the 2021 census. You're not just given data, but there are tabs where you can actually go into neighborhoods and you can drill right down to get some really interesting data, for instance, data about homelessness. There will be sort of like the red areas where there's a high percentage of household that are, real disadvantage or high youth unemployed, or there's lots of data that you can find by just keying ID, a space, and then the name of the geographic location. And knock your socks off with that one, because that is just really, really good. The second one is to look at REMPLAN, REMPLAN. That's another one that looks at the area, looks more at that economic data and jobs data and things like that as well. So then if you're looking for health information, some of the public health networks, they have some reports. I know in Melbourne there are some of the large foundations have got some really good reports on housing, etc. So, but no, if you're in Australia, if you do nothing else, just go to ID space Wangaratta, ID space, Blacktown, wherever you want to be, and you'll be amazed at the kind of information that's there. Okay, helping disengaged teens to commit to a full program in order to get results. Okay, yeah, make it as daft as it sounds. Include creativity, include right brain activity. And I know that it's easier said than done. and it is an issue, having worked in an area where we funded organisations that train teens, and teens basically, sometimes you couldn't find them past 1 o'clock, they'd just go home. But when we've really had teens engaged with activities, I remember we did the whole projects on digital storytelling, on video recording, anything that will get their right brain happening, as long as they're not, on drugs and whatever. But anything that will get their right brain happening does tend to have a little bit more success. So, yes. Just looking, any more questions? Okay. We've now reached the end of the session, and I trust you and had the valuable information. And if you want to have a conversation or follow up, I'm just going to put in the chat space my calendar link, so that you can contact me, make an appointment, and we can have a conversation at the convenient time for both of us. So, okay, thank you.